Welcome to the final seminar for Leadership Change and People Management. I'm Lynette Borrow and I'm your tutor for this particular unit. So before we begin, just as a reminder please, make sure you have with you your syllabus for Leadership Change and People Management, your assignment brief and assignment guidelines, and you should also have with you your prepared work from self-study following seminars 1 and 2. Now, the objectives of this session is that you will have first of all reviewed and confirmed your self-study tasks for seminar 2 and the progress on your assignment. And you will have reviewed lectures and activities from lectures 7 to 12, learning outcomes 4, 5 and 6. And then finalised approach to and arrangements for completion of your assessment related to your selected organisation and its context. Okay, so in self-study tasks 2, just a reminder, we asked you to look at your lectures 2 to 6 and draft your response to learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. And you were asked to make sure that you included concepts, theories and models, all properly referenced, applied these in the context of your organisation, supporting any discussion with examples of evidence from your organisation. Make sure that you've used the command verbs in the assessment criteria to develop appropriate response and tone for your assignment, and checked your work against the assessment criteria to ensure you have covered each assessment criteria as instructed. And you'll be expected to do that for the end of this as well. So, just to confirm, what you should have done is you should have researched, downloaded, collated information on your organisation for as many different sources as possible. But in this case, they are focused on organisational strategies and structures, HR strategy alignment, including people resourcing, retention, redeployment and release, and employee engagement and performance management. Now, I appreciate that not everything is going to be exactly the same in every business, and I also appreciate that there are things in there that are implicit within, say, a website rather than explicit. So there does need to be a little bit of creativity and lateral thinking on your behalf. The second thing that you should have done is to analyse and evaluate the information from the above using the tools, techniques and models as discussed in lectures 2 and 6. And you'll recall we did a synopsis in seminar 2 for all the different lectures that you had during that period. Devising and designing solutions where instructed. And then thirdly, you should have drafted a write-up of your assignment and response to the above following assessment criteria and submitting to any tutor for any feedback. Okay, so that was for learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. And now we're going to look at learning outcome 4 and 5, and then 6 is on the next slide. So, learning outcome 4, if you remember correctly, was understanding the potential value of leadership approaches linked to high performance working at all levels in the organisation, strategic, management and operational / tactical. So what's covered under that then? This will be lectures 7 and 8. Explain the significance of effective leadership. Look at the different levels. Everybody's involved. Describe and assess the value and relevance of all leadership theories, models and frameworks as far as contemporary organisations are concerned. Define the attitudes, behaviours and capabilities required for effective leadership at strategic management and operational levels in order to facilitate HPW, which stands for high performance working, and high engagement culture. And then 4.4, select and justify appropriate leadership actions and styles for a variety of representative organisation scenarios. So learning outcome 4, it's in truth all about leadership and a little bit of performance management. Learning outcome 5 is about change. So here we have to understand and be able to apply the theories, concepts and tools associated with organisational change. So 5.1, explain the significance of change management skills. 5.2, identify competencies and skills required for personal management of change and also for management of effective change interventions involving others. 5.3, evaluate and apply systematic techniques for effective and efficient management of change within a variety of scenarios. 5.4, identify sources of potential resistance to change. And then 5.5 was about appraising real-life examples of the change process. And so to understand what lessons can be learned for future change management interventions. So learning outcome 5, about change. Learning outcome 4, leadership. Learning outcome 5, change. Which brings us to learning outcome 6, which is know how to apply the capabilities associated with the effective and efficient management of change and to maximise the contribution of people within HPW culture. And although it talks about change, the reality is that this particular learning outcome is very much about professional development, so that organisations, as you will recall in the lectures, so that individuals and organisations can contribute in an ongoing way to changes within a particular market or market structure. Okay, so that's the learning outcome. The assessment criteria for this is evaluate the crucial importance of personal and professional development in achieving career goals as a manager, executive or agent for continuous improvement and transformational change. So that's where the link for the change is. 6.2, critically analyse the competences and capabilities required for sustained success in a corporate context as both professional manager, executive, and an effective change agent. And then 6.3, critically analyse the techniques for constructing, implementing, and reviewing a personal development plan, incorporating both improvement and remedial elements intended to deliver both reputational and career-oriented goals. And then systematically review work-related processes, interactions and outcomes in order to learn from experience as a manager, executive and an agent for change. So the next thing is applying those assignment criteria. So for learning outcome 4, we've got a certain amount of repetition. We've got the word explain. I'm not going to go through that again. And then we've got in 4.2, we've got describe and assess. 4.3 is define. And 1.4 is select. We've had the other words before. So for our terminology, describe means to give a written or spoken report of how something is done or what someone or something is like. Define means to explain or identify the nature or essential qualities of something. And select is to carefully choose as being the best or most suitable. And the justify bit is giving reasons for choice. So again, what's the examiner looking for? The demonstration of knowledge, application in context, and evidenced argument. So as we did in the previous seminar session, we have captured for lecture 7, slides 3 to 38, so it's a huge session this, the main themes for leadership and management. So the first slide you'll recall was all about leadership and how It impacts on culture, strategy, and employees, and provides a strategic fit and strategic aims for the organisation. And that brought us to the question, which is often debated, about key leadership theories and what were the key trends. And if you recall, in our table, we divided that up into 3 different areas. One was the traits of a leader. Are they born or made, or is it, how does that work? The second is about leadership styles. So are they autocratic or are they democratic? What are they? And contingency, and I'll put it in brackets, also means situation. So it's leadership by situation rather than, a somewhat vaguer leadership theory. That leads us to the notion of whether we're looking at a transactional leader, often more the manager, who will be keeping things going generally, maybe very efficiently and effectively, but they're not out for change management. Or the alternative is the transformational leader, who is out for change. For whatever reason, the transformational leader is the one that will make it happen. That leads us to not just the concept of whether it's transactional or transformation, but the behaviour that we recognise in our leaders. So are they doing directive, supportive, participative, or are they achievement oriented? Our next slide, I don't know if you can recall it there, was Ashridge, and it was about situational leadership. So is it that you're participative with your staff, or is it that you order them around? Are you supportive? Aren't you supportive? Do you communicate well? Don't you communicate well? So this gives a sort of version, really, of what situational or contingency leadership might be about. And from that, you will recall, we then looked at leadership and management as part of the McKinsey 7S framework, where leadership was some of the softer elements and management was rather more harder elements. And our final slide in this particular session was about integration of leadership and management. You'll remember the different roles that everybody and skills that all leaders have to have and how they work together in an integrative process. So our task for this particular part is, what are the relative merits, demerits of LNM style, leadership and management styles, in different circumstances? How will they impact on overall strategy and the integration of leadership and management in practice? That's leadership, not leadership and management not being 2 separate functions, but actually being one function. They're lecture 7, 3 to 8. So in lecture 8, 3 to 21, we looked at leadership in practice. So leadership in action, or something like that, you can call it, in practice. So what we said was that there are various theories of how work gets done, management gets done. But the starting point was about the qualities of leaders. So leadership these days is about authenticity and connection. And then you can look at comparisons between your organisation and another to see who's doing the best and why. Core, in as well as the qualities, is the organisation's emotional intelligence. No, let me correct that. It's the individual manager's emotional intelligence. And you recall we looked at Daniel Goleman's EI perspective. And then how do you get things done? So you've got the qualities, you've got the emotional intelligence to deal with people and to be aware of yourself, and that leads then to getting things done. And there were a number of different models and theories that would help us with this, but I would point out to the concept of Taylorism, which is the scientific approach to management. The Hawthorne studies, which, if you remember correctly, were looking at how people performed best. So is that by function? So is it by function? Or corporate parenting, which seems to come into play when there is a particular crisis. So these were practical leadership in practice activities. And for our questions or helpful tip questions for your assignment, it talks about assessing the leadership qualities and their appropriateness in different circumstances, including crisis management. Compare with the best political and business leaders. And then the second point to look at was consider the impact of emotional intelligence, evaluate EI qualities of the political and business leaders identified previously, and approaches to getting work done, use theories and research to establish how best to achieve goals in different circumstances. What lessons, this is the most important, what lessons can be learned from leadership actions as a whole, particularly in terms of crisis, in times of crisis. So, if you recall last time and today, we picked up what these command verbs are about, and we have 3 new ones: identify, apply, and appraise, all of which you seem to be doing already. But anyway, here's our terminology. Identify means to establish or indicate who, what, someone, or something is. Apply means to put to use specifically for some practical purpose, to bring into action, in other words, to apply theories and models, techniques in context to provide a response or solution to an identified issue. And then I popped in construct. Change strategy means to formulate, plan and build actions to meet the change goal. And appraise is to assess the value, quality or performance of a particular area. And again, as we said before, what are the examiners looking for? They're looking to see if you can demonstrate knowledge, application in context and evidenced argument. So as previously, this is lecture 9, slides 3 to 24. We've captured all of this in one slide. So if you remember correctly, this is part of the change management process. So this slides 9, lecture 9 and 10 were about change. So the point with change is that we have a current position, we have a future position, what we really like to do, and it's the configuration of the resources, technology, the person that enables us to move forward or not, as the case may be. So that's a very useful slide. But essentially he's coming in at the next thing we look at is change drivers. So from our change management, what is the thing that is causing change? So our change driver. And that comes from either external factors or organisational factors. And external drivers for change include things like changes in technology, changes in markets, political changes. So the pestle analysis is what you would have done. And then we can also look at other drivers, which are organisational factors, which is when you're looking at the internal factors that may cause change. So change in structure, change in new personnel, new production line, all of those are organisational factors. Then we considered the levels of change. So at the top end, you're looking at the enterprise as a whole. In the middle, you've got the organisational structures and capacities. And then at the bottom level, it's the individual person. And you'll recall we looked at this next model, which examines the nature of change and the extent of change. And what do we actually mean by these? So, you know, there's some at this level, realignment and incremental, just requires a little bit of tweaking or adaptation in what we do. But where you've got transformation and it's going to happen quickly, that's going to be a revolution. So what change are you looking for in your particular organisation of choice for your assignment? So that leads us to a whole range of change models. And these are not completely different from anything that we've done before. They're not exclusive. So you will come across this and other models which could be useful, but these are the key ones. So we looked at gap analysis, Kubler-Ross, that's the one with the stages of grief, Prosky and Adkar, and then Lewin, freeze, refreeze, unfreeze, unfreeze, freeze, and refreeze, and the Burke-Litwin model. And we looked at that in a bit more detail. And then that leads us to the classic planning document, which is the PDCA, which requires us to plan, to do, to check, and to act. And our helpful tips for this one: analyse the driver and nature levels of change, and evaluate the change models and processes used to affect change. So it will be a good idea for you to have a look at that in the context of the business you've chosen and examine the change models and processes and to see how they could be adapted to the company of your choice. Now, lecture 10, covering slides 3 to 26, is all about change in action. So in this one, we looked at both action research and also strategic management and the different styles available to us to meet our overall goals. That leads us to techno-structural interventions, where we looked at various models that you'll be familiar with, like the balanced scorecard, the shared values, the value chain, and also the cultural web. Those models, you've come across them lots of times before, but they are looking at change in action and using those existing models to make something new happen. And so our next step was this very practical one about Kotter's 8 steps, if you remember correctly. The iceberg is melting, do you recall that? Where we first want to create a climate for change in Kotter's 8 steps, then engage everybody and enable everybody, and then there's implementing the final change to make it all happen and to get the requisite knowledge from the whole process. That model then leads us to what change we need to take place, and equally the type of thing that we will get in terms of resistance to our change. So how do we cope with that? So we've gone through a whole cycle effectively of change in action, from the beginnings of where we're looking at what type of change we're going to include to right the way through in a very much more relaxed way. So our top tips or helpful tips for this particular section is analyse the different methods that can be used to affect change, applying them appropriately, by systematically constructing a justified strategy in context, taking into account potential change resistance and suggest solutions. So we now come to the final learning outcome 6. And the new word that we have come across is systematically. I'm not saying it's new, but within the context of this. The other 6.1, 2 and 3 are all familiar with what we've had before. So systematically is marked by a methodical plan or procedure which is organised and repeatable. And that's the issue. It's having the right process, right procedures to systematically go through and achieve our goals. So again, the question mark for the assessors are, does the author demonstrate knowledge, application in context, and evidenced argument? Can't get my words together today. So in this diagram here, we covered a number of different things, and they were all in lectures 11 and 12. And this is about organisational and personal development. So you will recall that the first session, these sessions 11 to 12 were on, 11 was on organisational development, and lecture 12 was primarily on personal development. And you'll recall that we started off with trying to understand what change meant to an organisation and what sort of capacity did it have to actually achieve it. And from that organisational capacity for change, we can draw conclusions of where the organisation needs to develop if it is to achieve its goals. And so the next area for consideration was continuing professional development, which was actually session 12, although some of this comes earlier into session 11. And then we had leadership management development, what's considered most important for a leader, which brings us to the PDP, which you will recall means personal development planning. Our next stage was to look at the PDP cycle, that's personal development planning cycle. So as you are going through, and you need to get your slides up, you need to be looking at what the process is for creating a PDP and keeping it moving and moving on to the next part. Then we looked at things like the GROW technique, if you remember correctly, hence the little leaves, where you're looking at goals, the reality of what the situation is now, what are our options, and then, you know, what's the way forward really for the individual. And there was some good guidance within that diagram of how somebody could put together, almost coach themselves through the GROW process. We then worked on how we could use the SWOT analysis as what we call a TOES matrix. So all the information from the previous slides that we've collected together in order to come up with a strategy for change that would best suit us, and in this case, in many instances, suit your employer. Having completed a SWOT analysis is a very fine line between just completing one part and then moving on to the next. So the change agent is the person who manages that particular process. And we can see an imperative for having a change agent. So from being a change agent, from going through the change agent process, what we've then thought about is Kolb's learning cycle. And the reason for that is very simply that the advantage to it is that you're not restricted as to what you're standing on when you start your learning cycle, whichever one suits you best, but ultimately all facets of it have to be covered. And so our final helpful tip on this one is critically analyse the tools and techniques that can be applied to individuals for personal professional development in pursuit of organisational development to achieve identified change goals and support professional organisational improvement. So if you can answer those queries, that particular question, you'll be well placed to take on the next step and your role. So that brings us to the end of our seminars. Our summary objectives for learning outcome 4 to 6 was that we would look at the self-study tasks from seminar 2 and your progress, and also review the lectures from 7 to 12. And those were learning outcomes 4, 5 and 6 on leadership change and professional development. So we've covered everything that you need to know for the assignment. So just to finalise, before I wish you all the best to get everything in on time, complete your assignment, finalise approach to an arrangement for completion of the assessment. Have you got a deadline that you've got to particularly meet? If you haven't, or even if you have, how are you going to prioritise your time to make sure you have achieved it? And it should be related to your selected organisation and the context in which it sits. Do remember the assignment format. Format and structure is that it's a business paper or research report. It should be in the style of third person. So you shouldn't be saying, I read this or I felt that. What you would actually say, it was observed that, further reading suggests that it. So it's all that rather more formal approach to writing, and that is valuable where English is not the first language, for example. But it makes it much more objective and evidence-based. So the word count, as a reminder, is 3,500 plus or minus 10%, and that excludes appendices. So I've got here a basic business report structure which you might find useful. Depends how you're writing it, because it's not forcing you to do one thing or another. But that's the structure: title page, summary, contents page, acknowledgement, glossary of terms. This is page 1, by the way, and then there's page 2. I'll just look at that. Okay, the main body, conclusions and recommendations, bibliography, references and appendices. Now, if I just flick back there then, you've got an explanation and an idea of the sorts of contents, things that go under there, and then some useful hints and tips about how best to explain these people. This assignment. And in our report structure 2, again, you've got the sorts of things you need to include, the main body of the text and how you're going to do it. It shows you how to put your referencing system together, and then you've got your hints and tips which should be useful to you. And I would point out, note, command verbs in assessment criteria. The most important thing, or one of the most important things, is you follow those command verbs, because it's not sufficient just to do a basic description. You have to be able to do stuff in detail. So that was on the basis of doing a business report. This is on the basis of doing a research report. And what you will see here, that the emphasis is much more on the academic. So whereas, just go back here, we had a simple introduction and going on to the main body, etc. In this example, the research report, we've got much more about the literature review and the methodology. So although the overall word count may be the same, the emphasis for this goes on that approach. So your research report then carries on from the methodology and the literature review and the methodology, to doing findings. That would be the main body of your ordinary report, but this is the finding thing. So there's logical sections based on learning outcomes, and you can use figures and diagrams. Okay, so again, command verbs is very important here. Conclusions and recommendations draw together those findings. Again, there's some useful hints there. And then we've got the bibliography, references and appendix, which are exactly the same as the business report. So what are examiners looking for again? Well, they're looking for the author's knowledge, application in context, and evidenced arguments. So they will look for known and reputable sources. They will make sure that you've got sufficient information that is current, accurate, relevant, and sufficient. CARS. They want to see evidence of evaluation, so from author, but with supporting arguments. They want to be able to show that you've considered implications for the findings in practice. So you're not just going to leave it in the air, you're actually going to say, well, if we do that, it sounds like a very good idea, but, and then results and recommendations to be applied in context, and reasonable and justified judgments. So just a reminder then for our referencing purposes, remember correctly how we showed a citation in text and also for the bibliography at the end. So, final check. Proofread your assignment very carefully before you submit it. Get a critical friend to read it through. Do they understand the meaning? Even if they're not a student of business, they are less likely to understand it if you have written it quite badly. So do they understand it? If they understand it, you're part of the way there. Ensure you have used a consistent typeface or presentation style. Check through the syllabus. I don't want any cut and paste in a different font style. Check through the syllabus. This is important. Make sure you have covered all the assessment criteria and use the command verbs as indicated. And as a hint, you may wish to mark up where you've met the assignment criteria in your script for easy reference. It's actually really good for us because it saves us having to hunt up textbooks, etc., etc. And ensure you have referenced fully and appropriately in text and in bibliography, and that there is no possible plagiarism. Remember, plagiarism will be penalised. Whatever you do, plagiarism will be penalised. Make sure you hand in your final version on time and in the manner prescribed. And that finishes this particular unit. Can I offer you good luck wishes to get this completed to the end? And the advantage is that at least you can go through all the slides and all the recordings so that you have a better understanding of how this is to be achieved. Thank you very much.